You know, I love Nextcloud. That's probably why I create so many videos about it. It's just a very awesome piece of software, but it's not always very straightforward when it comes to how to install it. Now, I've done many videos on Nextcloud, and this video in particular is not all new, but I wanted to update it because the last video that I made about Nextcloud, about setting up Nextcloud, is getting to be about a year old, and enough has changed to where I feel like it's time to update this tutorial. Now, if you already have a Nextcloud server that you set up with my previous video, then there's nothing to see here. We're not going to be doing anything, incredibly different, but it is going to be an updated look at installing Nextcloud. And not just installing Nextcloud, I'll be showing you a bunch of other things as well. I'll have time codes down below that you can use to get right to the section that interests you. And by the end of this video, you will have your very own Nextcloud server set up and ready to go. Now, before we get into that though, I want to take a moment to mention the sponsor for today's video, Linode. Linode is a cloud server provider, and not just any cloud server provider. They are a Linux-based cloud server provider, which means you can get your very own Linux server through their platform. They have Linux server plans starting at just $5 a month, which is very affordable. And if you don't already have an account on Linode, you could create a new account by using the URL that you see on the screen right now. By following that link, you will actually get access to $100 in free credit towards your new account. And like I mentioned, they have instances that start at just $5 a month, so there's a whole lot of Linux that you could fit within that credit. Their dashboard is very easy to use and it's fast, and their entire platform is even faster now because they've recently launched NVMe-based block storage devices, which is just so cool. In addition to Linux servers, you can manage DNS, set up containers, block storage, object storage, or check out their marketplace because there's all kinds of pre-made apps that you can benefit from right there in the marketplace. And even if you're not feeling particularly creative when it comes to what to use your Linode account for, one thing you could do is create your very own Linux server that you can use to follow along with any of the tutorials on this particular channel. Definitely check them out. They've been a sponsor for this channel for quite a while now, and I really appreciate it. Thanks yet again to Linode for their support and their continued support of LearnLinuxTV. I really appreciate it. Now, let's get started with Nextcloud. I'm very excited because by the end of this video, we're going to have our very own Nextcloud server set up and ready to go. It's going to be awesome. But in order to install Nextcloud, we need a Linux instance to install it onto. So what I'm going to do in this section is create an Ubuntu server 20.04 instance here on Linode. Now, on your end, Linode is not required for this tutorial. It's just what I'm going to be using for my examples. All you really need is an Ubuntu server installation, specifically Ubuntu server 20.04. It's possible these commands might work with a different version of Ubuntu, but I've only tested these commands with Ubuntu server 20.04, so that's what I'm going with. Anyway, in this section, like I mentioned, I'll be creating an Ubuntu server instance here on Linode, so if you stick around, that's what I'm assuming you'd like to do, or maybe you just want to see what the process looks like. But if you already have an instance, then you can skip this section and move on to the next. Now, as a quick aside, we have the marketplace right here, and that's not what we're going to be using. But I just want to show you guys that Nextcloud is actually available on the marketplace on Linode, and you can use that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually pretty cool. It automates the entire process. But I'm a fan of actually setting it up myself, not because I like to do things the hard way, but I think it's better when it comes to learning to understand all the components that goes into an installation of an application. And by doing it manually, we're going to get a first-hand look at how to do this. And it's not complicated as long as you know what the steps are. And thankfully I do. I'm able to show you guys the steps. So we're going to be setting it up manually. I just wanted to point this out because I'm assuming I'd probably get a comment asking me why I wasn't using the marketplace because it's faster. And the answer is because I'm a big fan of manual setups. They're just a lot more fun. So anyway, I'll go over here to Linodes and I will create a new Linode instance. And like I mentioned, I'm going to be choosing Ubuntu Server 20.04. When it comes to the region, you can select whichever one you'd like. I'm going to go with this one right here. Canada's pretty awesome. I think they're relatively close. And that's basically what you're trying to do is just find a data center that's close to you. You can scroll through this list right here and just see if any of these are closer to your geographic area. And whichever that might be, you choose that option and we'll move on. In this section right here, we're going to choose the plan for our Linode instance. And we really want to choose something with at least 2 gigabytes of RAM, preferably 4, but you might not need 4, we could go with 2. The dedicated CPU plans, these ones are going to be a little bit more expensive, probably not what we'd like to go with right now. You can always change the plan later. To save some money though, what I'm going to do is go to shared CPU, and 2 gigabytes of RAM, like I mentioned, is the recommended minimum. So you could go with this one, and that would be fine. You get 1 CPU core and 2 gigs of RAM. But on my end, I'm actually going to choose this instance right here because we get 80 gigabytes of storage, 4 gigs of RAM, and 2 CPU cores, which is going to work a lot better for Nextcloud. Again, 2 gigabytes is the minimum, so if you want to save some money, you could just go with that one. I'm going to be deleting this instance as soon as I'm done creating this tutorial. I already have a Nextcloud server. I just want to show you guys how to do it. So I don't mind keeping a 4 gig instance around just to have a better experience. For the label, this is essentially the name of your Linode instance. You can name it whatever you'd like. Maybe you'll call it Nextcloud because that's what we're setting up today. But what I'm going to do instead is actually give it a label that matches the domain that I plan on giving the instance. That's not required if you're using a domain. It really doesn't matter what you call it. You can name this potato if you'd like. It doesn't have to match anything. But I like to keep things consistent, and I will be using a domain, so I'll just add that right here. For tags, I'm going to leave that blank. That is something that you could fill in if you want to give your instance some sort of tags. Tags are just identifiers, basically a name-value pair, and you could create whatever tags you'd like to create. For example, maybe have a production tag or maybe a development tag, depending on how far along it is. Again, I'll leave it blank. It's really up to you if you want to use tags and what you want to call them. Tags can be used basically to further label your instances. For the root password, I'll go ahead and type that in. And this password in particular is going to be the password we will use to log into our instance, so make sure you remember it. And if you have an SSH key like I do, as you see here, you could go ahead and check this box. That'll make sure that your SSH key is able to log into the instance. I'm not going to choose that though. You can go ahead and do that if you'd like. Continuing. You can set up backups. I highly recommend that you set up backups for your Nextcloud instance. You'll get a backup every single day, which is really great because if something happens to your Nextcloud instance, you could revert it back to the previous day, which is always useful, especially if you're doing some sort of maintenance or something like that. It is an additional cost, $5 more a month for this particular plan. You get the total cost per month right here. And again, I went a little high on this instance type. I didn't need to choose a 4 gig instance. I would have been fine with 2 gigs, so the price would have been a little bit lower. Private IP, I'm going to leave that blank. And let's go ahead and create our Linode instance. So right now the instance is booting up. Actually, it's provisioning. And any moment now it's going to change to booting. So what I'm going to do is open up the Lish console right here. And as soon as it starts booting up, we should see the process right here in this window. All right, so now it's booting up. And as you can see here, we have a login screen. So what I'll do is just type in root for the username and then the password that we gave it during the setup process, which I don't think I typed correctly. Let's try that again. And there we go. We're logged into our Linode instance right now. That's pretty cool. Now you can actually use the Lish console for all the commands that I'm going to give you. I prefer SSH. That's just the way I like to do it. If you don't have an SSH client, for example, you could just use this window. The Lish console is fine. But if you do have access to SSH, I do think that's better. Highly recommended. So what I'll do right now is just log out. I'll type exit. Close this window right here. We'll copy this IP address. And I already have a terminal open right here, as you can see. So I could type SSH root at, I'll paste in the IP. There it is. Let's see if it works. So I will say yes to confirm that I do want to continue connecting to this server. Type in the password. And we're in. Again, SSH is optional, but recommended. Now we're going to come back to this in just a moment. But what I want to do right now is take a quick detour and talk about domains and DNS. So we have this IP address right here, And this particular IP address goes directly to this Linode instance. And that means that this IP address is routable from the public internet. But I don't know about you, I probably won't remember that IP address. It would be a lot better if I was to go ahead and add a domain instead. And I'm going to do that right now because DNS takes a little bit of time to propagate. So I figure before we actually get the Nextcloud instance built, we may as well set up DNS early. So that way, maybe by the time we get to that point, it'll already be propagated. So I'll copy the IP address, which I think I've already done. So right here, we actually have a feature for domains built right into Linode. So if you do have a domain name, you can actually add it here to Linode. So that way Linode can be the name server for your domain. And then it makes it that much easier for you to set up a domain for your instance. If you don't already have a domain name, you just go over here to Hover. Hover is actually my favorite place to buy domains. They're not a sponsor or anything like that. Maybe I should actually reach out to them and ask them to be because I've been using them for so many years. But as of the time I'm recording this video, they are not a sponsor. It's just what I use. So if you don't already have a domain name, then what you could do right here is just type in a domain that you would like to have if it's available, and it'll let you know if it's available. And I just randomly typed mynextcloudserver.com. That's not what I'm going to use. And it is available. So I guess if somebody is watching this, you might want to score this domain as $13.99 if you like it. I don't want to pressure anyone into buying anything, but you don't need a domain. It's not required. I highly recommend you get one though, because it just makes the process that much easier. There's going to be a few things we'll set up that does require a domain, but most of what we're doing today will not. Now what I'm going to do is switch over to a different Linode account. This is just my demo, hence the name right here. My actual domain is on a different Linode account altogether. And what I want to do is grab the IP address right here and then create an A record for the domain to point to this IP. So what I'm going to do is open up a private window. I don't want to lose my current Linode session. And I'm going to go back to cloud.linode.com and log into my actual Linode account. So what I'm going to do is go to domains right here. And I have the domain LearnLinuxTV, which is what I'm going to choose for this particular tutorial. So what we'll need to do is create an A record, and inside the A record, we'll paste in the IP address. So I'll paste that in right here, and that's the IP address for the Linode instance that we'll be using for Nextcloud. And for the host name, I'm going to call it Nextcloud, just like that. So my domain is learnlinux.cloud. The subdomain is going to be Nextcloud. So the entire thing is going to be nextcloud.learnlinux.cloud. Now on your end, if you are going to create a domain like I'm doing right here, then what you'll need to do is just update the DNS records for your domain. So if you're using Hover, you would log in there, update it there. If you've imported your domain into Linode, you could create the A record there like I'm doing right now. You just basically do this wherever your DNS server is. You create an A record, you paste in the IP address for your Linode instance, and then you give it a subdomain, which is how I like to do it. And then I'll click Save. And this is going to take some time to propagate. So what I'll do is just go ahead and put this aside for now. Put that right there. And we have a domain. The first thing I'm going to do is create a user for myself. I'm logged in as root right now, and that's really not something that we should be doing. It's okay to log in as root at first, but the root account is very important. We want to lock that down. But in order for us to lock it down, we need to have another user account to use instead. So what I'm going to do is type add user, and then the username that I would like to use. So in my case, I'll add the user J. I'll set a password for the user, and I'll type it in again. And here we could type in some additional information for our user. I just skip all these fields, but you could definitely fill them in if you'd like to, especially if you're going to have multiple users using the system. But I'm just going to leave it blank. I'll just hit enter, enter again, enter, enter, enter. So now it's just asking me to confirm that the information is correct. Y is capital, which means if I press enter without typing Y or N, it's just going to assume yes. So I'll press enter, and now we have a user. The next thing we want to do is make sure that user has access to sudo. So first of all, we'll type which and then sudo, and that helps us make sure that sudo is actually installed, which it is. Now, more than likely, you should have that installed already, so there shouldn't be anything that you'll need to do. Next, what we'll do is make sure that our new user has access to sudo, because installing the package isn't good enough. We need to allow the user to use sudo. And in the case of Ubuntu server, what we're going to do is type usermod dash lowercase a uppercase g. So we want to add a user to a group, and the group that we want to add a user to is sudo, and the user that we want to add to that group is the one that we've just created. So now if I type groups and then the username, you can see that that user is now a member of the sudo group. Let's log out. I'll just type exit. And we're back to our local command shell. And if you're using the list console, you could just log in. But in the case of SSH, I'm going to remove root and replace it with the user that I just created. Type in the super secret password, preferably correctly. And we're in. Now the next thing that we're going to do is update all the packages on the server, because every time we're setting up a new Linux server, we always want to start with the latest and greatest packages. They include security updates, so they're very important. And now that I'm logged in as my local user, I don't actually have root privileges by default, but sudo will give me that. So what I could do is actually run sudo apt update, and this will update the repository index. So I'll press enter, type in the password yet again. So we have 89 packages that can be upgraded. That's quite a few, so let's take care of that. The first command just updated the package repository index, and the command that I'm about to give you will help you actually install the updates. So the command sudo apt dist-upgrade will install all available updates. Now here we can see that we have 89 packages that are going to be upgraded. We have 42 security updates, so this is very important. So I'll press enter to accept the default since Y is capital. And now we have all the updates installed. That's really cool. The next command, you probably won't need this one. It's just probably a good idea considering how many packages needed to be updated. And what I'm referring to is removing any orphan packages or anything like that. Very unlikely, but what we're going to do is just run sudo apt auto remove. And I didn't expect that it was going to find anything. It's just a good idea to clean that every now and then. But anyway, we're good to go on that. Now, we will need to reboot our server since we did install security updates. But before we do that, though, I want to give the server a name. Right now, the server is called localhost. And that's fine, I guess. But what I like to do is give the server a name that identifies what it actually is. So to do that, I will type sudo nano. That's the text editor that I'll be using quite often in this video. I'm a big fan of Vim, but Nano's easier to explain. Anyway, the file that I want to edit is /etc/hostname, just like that. And here we have the actual hostname, which we knew was localhost. We saw it in the prompt. And what we're going to do is give it a name, like I mentioned, that identifies the server. And if you don't have a domain, you could just call it Nextcloud if you'd like. Maybe you could just call it NC, short for Nextcloud. You can name it potato, pizza, whatever you'd like. It's just a name that you would use to identify the server. There's no actual meaning to the name. But if you do have a domain, then I recommend you type the domain name for your instance right here and make that match. This is only important if you do have a domain. If you don't, you could just simplify it down to Nextcloud or whatever you'd like to name it. But since I will be using a domain for this instance, I'm going to be typing the fully qualified domain name, which means the entire domain name, right here in this file. And this is going to be the only thing that we're going to add to this file. So Control-O, that brings up the save dialog, enter to save it, Control-X to exit out. And then the next file that we need to edit is /etc/hosts. On the second line here, we have localhost. If you recall, that's actually the original name, but we don't want to remove that. We'll leave that one alone. And right after that, we'll create a new entry. So the IP address is going to be different by just one. This is another loopback address. I'm going to tab all the way over here. And then what you do is you give it the same name that you gave it in /etc/hostname. So if you called it Nextcloud, for example, that's what you would type right here. If you do have a domain, then you could type that right here. Just like that. And then space. And then what you do after the space is type just the hostname without the domain part, So that way we could refer to localhost as localhost nextcloud.learnlinux.cloud or simply Nextcloud. So that's how I like to set up mine. So go ahead and pause the screen if you want to jot this down. There's also going to be a list of commands in the official article for this video. The blog post will be linked down below in the description. So if you'd like to copy and paste the commands, you can get the commands from that article. Anyway, Control O and then Enter to save it. Control X to exit out. So we updated the system, we created a non-root user account, and we gave the server a name as well. So that was a lot of changes. So what we should do right now is reboot the server. And to do that, I'll go up here. We have the instance right there. I'm going to click reboot. You could also type reboot and press enter from the command line, but I often find it easier if you're using Linode to just do it through the dashboard. It actually does seem to reboot faster when you do that, but it's not that long anyway. In just a few minutes, the system will be back up and running. So we see it's rebooting. So what we could do, if we want to follow along with the process, we can open the Lish console and we'll wait for it to start back up. All right, so it's starting up. Should be ready any second now. Notice right here that it says Nextcloud login. That's the host name right here. The host name that we set earlier. That's the shorter version of the host name. And right here, it shows the fully qualified domain name. And this is just a local naming scheme, but we're going to test the domain right now and see whether or not it's actually available. And it would be really cool if it is. So let's find out. So here I have my terminal, and this is the terminal here on my local laptop. It's very important because if you do this from the server, you'll get different results. What I want to do is type nslookup, and then after that, I'll type the domain for the Nextcloud server. And actually, it looks like mine has already been updated. It's very possible that when you go to use nslookup, depending on how much time has passed, you might not actually get a result. DNS sometimes takes a really long time to propagate. I'm really lucky because it just happened to be very fast for me. Most often, it usually happens within 30 minutes in my experience, but I have seen some that take overnight. It's just the way it is. But at least in my case, I could tell that it is set up and ready to go because the IP address here for this domain is in fact the IP address for the Linode instance. And to prove that, here I have the SSH command that I use to log into the instance as my local user. But what I'm going to do instead is type nextcloud.learnlinux.cloud, and it did recognize it. It didn't give me an error message or anything like that. So I'll say yes, and then I'll type in my password. And we're good to go. You can even see right here in the bash prompt, it says Nextcloud. So it took the new name, we're fully up to date, and that's really cool. The next thing that I want to do is actually make a change to the SSH config file. I want to disallow root login. That's really important. I have another video on my channel that goes over securing SSH. Just check that video out if you'd like. But I'm going to be doing one of the tweaks in this video. If you want to do the rest, you can watch the other one. What I want to do is type sudo nano/etc/sshd/sshd_config. Type in my password. Press enter, and scroll down. We're looking for the root login option. Permit root login, yes. We're going to set this to no. And you should only do this if you've already created your local user account. If you didn't do that, well, you're actually stopping your ability to log in via SSH if root is all you have. So this is for after you've already created your local account, which we've done. So I'll save the file, and then we'll restart SSH. Sudo systemctl restart sshd. So now we've disallowed root login. That's pretty cool. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do right now is download Nextcloud itself. And we'll need to use a web browser for that, or at least to get started anyway. So I'll switch up here. Let me close this. So I'll just type nextcloud.com into the browser. Now, they actually change the website every now and then, but what you're looking for is a place to download Nextcloud or get Nextcloud. Here's a button for that right here. So we're going to hover over that and click Server Packages. Again, the verbiage might change, but we just want to download it. Now, we have a download button right here, but I'm not going to click on it. What I'm going to do instead is right-click on it, and we're going to copy the link, and then I'll go back down here to the terminal. We need to see if wget is installed. which in my case it actually is. If you don't get any output when you type which wget, that means it's not installed. And if it's not, you can run sudo apt install wget. That'll make sure that you have wget on your system. But obviously I don't need to do that because I already have it. So I'll type wget, and then what I'll do is paste in the URL that I copied earlier. And there it is. So the URL will probably change. They release new versions all the time. But as of the time I'm recording this video, we're up to version 23.0.0. We have the version number right here. So you could be on 24 or higher, or maybe a point release. Doesn't really matter. You just need to download the latest version. And since we copied this link directly from the site, this is going to give us exactly what we're looking for. So now, as you can see, we have Nextcloud downloaded. It's a zip file. So we're going to leave that alone for now. We will be needing that shortly, but I just want to make sure we have it on our file system. And as you can see, we do. So I'll put that aside and we'll move on to the next step. Now, the next thing we're going to do is set up the database server for Nextcloud. We definitely want to make sure we have that ready to go when we need it. So first we'll install a special package that'll give us access to a MySQL server, specifically MariaDB. So what I'll do is type sudo apt update, which I've already done recently, so there probably wasn't any need to do that again so soon. But it's not a bad idea to make sure the index is up to date. Anyway, next what we're going to do is type sudo apt install, and the package that we want to install is MariaDB-server. That'll give us the server component. And there's going to be a number of other dependencies that'll come along for the ride. That's fine. I'll press enter to accept the default of yes. And that'll download MariaDB and get it installed for us. Next, what we're going to do is type systemctl status MariaDB. We want to see if there's actually any issues, if it started properly. There shouldn't be any issues if this is a fresh server. But as you can see, it's active, running, so we're good. If for some reason it was not, you could just change this to start, and that'll get that taken care of. Another thing that you look for is whether or not it's enabled. My font size is way too big, so it's hard to see. I'll just go to the right. It says enabled right here. If yours shows disabled, then what you'll need to do is change the keyword right here to enable, and that'll make sure that the MariaDB database server actually starts up with your server automatically, so that way you won't have to log in and start it on your own. So we have the database server installed. Next, what we're going to do is change the default settings. We have a special command for that here on Ubuntu server. We're going to run sudo MySQL, even though it's MariaDB. The command that we're using right now still refers to it as MySQL. It's okay. MySQL _secure installation. Now it's asking me to type in the current root password, and it's not asking for the root user password, the one that we created with our Linode instance or whatever your instance happens to be. It wants the current password for the database server itself, and we haven't set that yet. So we'll press enter, we'll leave that blank because the password is actually blank right now. And now it's asking us if we would like to actually set the root password, which would be a great idea. So I'll press enter. And now we need to set the root password for the MySQL root user. What I recommend you do is create a randomly generated password and save it in a very, very safe place. I'm going to type the password by hand in my case because this is just a tutorial, but on your end, I highly recommend a long randomly generated password because it would be a very bad thing if somebody was able to log into your MySQL instance. You definitely don't want that. So just make sure you generate a very secure password. And I'll type it again. And now we have the root password set. The next thing it wants to know is if we would like it to remove anonymous users. That's a good idea. I'll just press enter for yes because that is the default. Disallow root login remotely, absolutely. I'll press enter to accept the default for that as well. We definitely want to make sure that we say yes to this. We definitely want to disallow root login remotely. Very good idea. Remove the test database and access to it. We'll be creating our own database. We don't need the test database, so I'll press enter for that as well. Reload privilege tables, yes. And now we have some relatively sane defaults for MariaDB. Maybe not the most secure defaults, but this is the least you should do when it comes to configuring the security. It's just a good idea to run the MySQL secure installation, which is what we've done, and now that's ready to go. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is create the actual database. We set up a database server, but we need a database for Nextcloud. So to log into the MariaDB server, I'm going to type sudo MariaDB. And that bypasses the password and everything, but only users that have access to sudo will be able to do this. So there's no security concern. It's just a quick way to get to a prompt. And we have the MariaDB prompt right here. So what we want to do is actually create the database. So what I'll do is type create database in all caps. Create database is an instruction. We'll leave that in uppercase. It's very common to uppercase instructions in the MySQL syntax, which is what MariaDB uses. And then we'll name the database Nextcloud. That can be in lowercase. That's the name of the database. It's not an instruction. It's a variable, basically. We want to call the database Nextcloud. We will end the instruction with a semicolon, which I still forget to this day, over 20 years later. So if you ever forget the semicolon, don't feel bad. It happens to all of us. Anyway, I'll press enter. It says query OK. Let's make sure that the database is truly there. We'll type show and then databases. Semicolon. And as you can see, we do indeed have a Nextcloud database right there. It's an empty database. There's nothing inside right now. We'll be changing that later. But next we'll need to create some permissions to allow the Nextcloud application to access the database server. And we do that by creating a grant. We're granting permission, and we're doing that by creating a user abstraction in MySQL. And what we'll do is type grant. We want to grant everything. We want to grant all privileges, and we want to grant those privileges on the Nextcloud database. We'll type .star at the end to make sure that this is a recursive change to every part of the database. We're going to grant those privileges to a user named Nextcloud. So that's our database user. And that user is going to be present here on the local server. We don't want this user to have actual remote login privileges. Instead, we're going to restrict it to localhost. That's more secure. And then identified by, and then you type a password in the quotes right here. And what I recommend you do is generate a randomly generated password. That's always a good idea. You want to make sure that it's very, very, very secure. But since I'm just using a test instance right here, it doesn't really matter. In my case, since I will be deleting this, I'll just use the password Nextcloud is awesome with the first letter of every word uppercase, exclamation mark at the end. So on your end, just generate a random password to make it secure. Again, this is just a demo, so that's why I'm being a little lax on that. So I'll press enter. It says query OK. And then we'll enter flush privileges. It'll make sure that all the privileges are refreshed since we did actually create a grant. And that's it. We're done with the database. That's all there was to it. Let's exit out of here. And we'll move on to the next step. Now, the next thing we're going to do is set up the web server component. I'm going to be using Apache in my case. You can use Nginx. That's beyond the scope of this video. That's another popular solution that will provide you a web server. Nextcloud needs a web server so that it can be well served. So to do that, what we're going to do is type sudo apt install. And there's a ton of packages here. So what I'll do is just paste in the list. You can pause the video if you want to jot this down, or just go to the article that I linked in the description down below, which will have all the commands in there if you want to copy and paste. So I'll just paste these in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So there I've pasted in the list of packages, but if you're ready to move on, I'll press enter. And this command will lead to the installation of quite a few packages, because it's not just the web server that's being installed here, it's also PHP and related PHP packages as well. It's beyond the scope of this video for me to go over the purpose of every single package here, but these are the ones you need, so I'll press enter. And now we have those packages installed. Next, what we should do is check the status of the Apache web server. Make sure it's running, didn't have any errors or anything like that. So we can type systemctl status Apache 2. And the Apache 2 package should have came along for the ride when we installed the other packages. It should have been installed as a dependency. So I'll press enter. And as you can see, Apache is installed and it is running. It says active. So that's pretty cool. If for some reason that command failed, just make sure that you actually entered in all of the packages that I listed. And if checking the status still failed, then you could run sudo apt install Apache 2 just like that, which will make sure that Apache is actually installed on your server. Now, next, what we're going to do is enable some PHP modules that are required. Some of these might already be enabled, and that's fine. We just want to make sure. So what we're going to do is type sudo php nmod, short for enable module. We want to enable bcmath, gmp, ImageMagick, which is actually abbreviated, and intl. So there you go. I was able to enable those particular PHP modules. I wasn't expecting any special output. As long as we don't see any errors, we should be fine. Now, as a quick aside, if we switch back to the browser here, copy the IP address in a different tab, we paste that in, we'll have the default Apache start page already ready to go. So technically, our web server is actually set up. We still have to set up Nextcloud, but what this proves is that our instance is available. I typed in the IP address and it does show the Apache 2 default page. But what we should also be able to do is type in the domain name as well if you have one, and it should take you to the exact same place. We don't have a secure connection just yet. That's okay. We'll fix that. But so far, everything is working. And on your end, you should be able to access the Apache 2 default page by either the IP address or a domain if you have one. So as you can see here, so far so good. Next, what we're going to do is type which unzip. We want to make sure that we have unzip installed here on our server. And in my case, I don't. If I did, I would have had some output from that command. So I'll run sudo apt install and then unzip, just like that. And that was pretty fast. What we're going to do right now is actually prepare the Nextcloud files for installation. If you recall, we downloaded this zip file right here earlier in the video. So what I'm going to do is unzip that. And it's going to explode in a bunch of files. That's okay. And as you can see, we have the Nextcloud directory right here that came from the zip file. So we actually don't need the zip file anymore. So what I'm going to do is use the rm command to get rid of it. So the only thing remaining is this folder right here. And if I check the permissions though, I am the owner of this Nextcloud directory, but that's not what we want. Instead, we want to make the web server user the owner of this directory because the web server is the one that's going to be serving it, so the web server needs full control. So to fix that, what we're going to do is type sudo chown-R. We want this to be a recursive change, everything underneath Nextcloud. And the user is going to be www-data. And then the group is also going to be the same. And the folder that we want to make that change to is the Nextcloud directory. And as you can see, the Nextcloud directory is now owned by the www-data user and group. So far, so good. Now, what I like to do is name the Nextcloud folder or the app folder after the domain that I plan on using. On your end, you can just leave it as Nextcloud if you don't have a domain. But what I'm going to do is move that. And I will need to use sudo now that I actually changed the ownership to a different user. So we'll move it. And what I'll do is move it to nextcloud.learnlinux.cloud in my case, because that's my domain. That's not required. I just like to keep everything consistent. And now that's done. Now, currently, the Nextcloud directory that we've just renamed is in my home directory here. And I don't like that because we're not going to be serving Nextcloud from our home directory. Instead, what we're going to do is serve it from /var/www. So what I'm going to do is run sudo mv for move. We want to move the Nextcloud directory that we've downloaded and extracted and change the ownership on to its final location in the file system. So we're going to move that folder and we're going to move it into /var/www. It's cut off here on the side, but it's /var/www. So as you can see, we have the Nextcloud directory underneath /var/www. And then next, what we're going to do is disable the default site for Apache. We don't really need it. It's just there to make sure that Apache is working. We did see the test page, so we have no more use of it. So what I'm going to do is type sudo a2 dissite. You type 3 zeros and then tab. It should autocomplete because the config file is where this command expects to find it. That's a default config file. We didn't create it. It just comes along for the ride. This is what gives us that default Apache start page that we no longer need. So by running the a2 dissite command, we are disabling that particular virtual host. We just don't need it, so let's get rid of it. Now it's telling us that we need to run systemctl reload Apache 2. We're not going to do that quite yet. We will be restarting Apache later, and that'll automatically take care of that anyway. So next what we'll do is set up a config file for Apache for serving Nextcloud. So what we'll do is type sudo nano, and the file is going to be under /etc/apache2 sites-available. And the name of the file I'm going to make exactly the same as the host name or domain. You don't have to do that, but again, I'm a big fan of consistency. And this also helps you keep track of multiple sites, because if you name the config file after the domain, it just becomes that much easier to keep track of. So anyway, nextcloud.learnlinux.cloud, just change this to whatever yours happens to be. And we want the file to end with an extension of .conf. It's a config file, so that's what we're creating. That's what we'll name it. And this is an empty file. So what I'm going to do is paste in the contents right here, and then I'll explain it. And here it is. Now you can actually find the contents of this file that I'm using in the official blog post for this video. So what you want to do is grab that content, paste it in right here, and there's actually several things that you'll need to change. So for example, we have the document root. You want to make sure that you actually have everything named exactly to what it actually is. So I highly doubt you're using this name right here. You just use whatever name you'd like or whatever your domain happens to be. And you want to make that consistent throughout. So we have it here, we have it here, we have it here as well. And if we scroll down, we have it a couple more times. So as you can see, there's various places where you'll need to update that. So just make sure that you use the correct name right there that matches what it actually is. And once you've done that, we'll save the file, Control-O, Enter, and then Control-X. And we have that config file. So what we could do now is enable the site. And the way we'll do that is we'll type sudo a2 nsite nextcloud.learnlinux.cloud. So we'll type sudo a2 nsite and then whatever file name you decided to go with. You don't have to type the path to it, just the name of the file. And this is mine here, so I'll press enter. And here's telling me that I need to reload Apache in order to make this change take effect. But we're not going to do that quite yet. There's a few other things that we will need to do before we actually go ahead and restart Apache. So the next order of business for us is to configure PHP. So what we're going to do is type sudo nano /etc/php and then /7.4. That's the PHP version. If that version ever changes, you'll need to change that here as well. But in Ubuntu Server 20.04, at least, it should always be 7.4. Apache 2, and then php.ini. This is the config file for PHP. We want to be very careful with this, but there's a number of changes that we need to make. And the way that I like to do this is search for the string that I want to change because this file is massive. So we can hold Control and press W. That opens up a search box. And the first thing that we want to search for is memory_limit. And right now, the memory limit is set to 128 megabytes. Let's crank this up to 512. And then the next one we want to find is going to be upload_max. And that should be enough to type. We shouldn't have to type the entire thing. Upload max file size. That is what I was looking for. We're going to bump this up all the way to 200 megabytes. Next up, we have max execution time. We're going to set that to 360. We'll search again, this time for post max file size. I'm going to set that to 200 megabytes. And then next, we're going to search for date.timezone. And that's going to be commented out. We'll remove the semicolon in front. And then at the end, what we're going to do is choose our time zone. And I will have some information in the blog article, a link that'll get you a list of time zones that you could type in case yours isn't the same as mine, but mine is going to be America/Detroit. That's going to be good enough. Again, just check that link if yours is not America/Detroit. If you're somewhere else in the world, you just type the correct one for you. Check the link if you don't know what that is already. Next, we'll look for opcache, specifically whether or not it's enabled. And it is, but we'll uncomment that. Control W again. opcache.interned. And this is the one we want. It's set to 8. And that's actually correct. So we'll search for the next one. opcache.max, which is the next one over. I probably should have looked at that. It's set to 10,000. That is correct. We'll uncomment that. Next, opcache.memory, which was right here on the same page yet again. Opcache memory consumption, that's what I was looking for. We'll uncomment that, and we'll leave it at 128. opcache.save_comments. There it is. Set that to 1, which it already was. I just uncommented that one. And the last one, opcache. We should be able to type just reval. So there it is. So what we're going to do is just change that to 1. And that should be everything that we needed to do for the PHP configuration. So Control O and then Enter, Control X to exit out. And after this, what we're going to do is enable some additional Apache modules. And to do that, we'll type sudo a2 nmod. We want to enable dir, dir, env, headers, mime, rewrite, and SSL. And it's okay if they show that they're already enabled. You just want to run that command to make sure that they are indeed enabled. Now that that's done, we can actually restart Apache. The commands that we've run so far have asked us to reload it, to restart it, and we've been ignoring that because we had additional configuration changes to make. Now that we're done with that, we can run sudo systemctl restart Apache 2. And let's make sure that nothing exploded. If anything failed, we should have received an error message, but just in case, we'll check the status, and it is running. So far, so good. And now, here's where things get especially exciting, because we have most of the configuration done. There's some other things that we have to do. But if we go up here, we still have the default page, which actually no longer exists because we disabled this, but I didn't refresh the page since. But if I do refresh the page, we should see the Nextcloud configuration page come up. And there it is. How cool is that? So what we need to do right now is set up our Nextcloud instance. And the first thing it's asking us to do is to create an admin account. We'll give it a name. I just named mine my first name, easy enough. And then we'll type in a password. The data folder, we're going to leave that alone and scroll all the way down to the database section. The database user, basically the grant that we created, we named it Nextcloud. And the password that I decided to use was Nextcloud is awesome with an exclamation mark. Hopefully you used a randomly generated password. And obviously you shouldn't tell your password to everyone out there in the open, but since this server is going to be deleted, I don't really care. So I'll type in the password. Database name. We named it Nextcloud. And the database server is located here on localhost. We also have a box here that shows the verbiage, install recommended apps. I recommend that. So we'll click finish setup, and as long as I didn't type in anything incorrectly, we should have our very own Nextcloud server all set and ready to go. Well, actually, it won't be all set quite yet. It will be working. We have a few more changes to make. I'll just click finish setup. And check this out. Nextcloud is running. We did it. There's still some additional changes that we should make, like I mentioned, but this is a really good sign. Nextcloud technically is working. Now, what I don't really like about this, though, is that we don't have a secure connection to this particular app. So what we should do right now is install Let's Encrypt. And what that'll allow us to do is actually get a certificate to secure our connection. It's a very good idea. It doesn't cost anything. And to do that, what we're going to do is go to another website. And that website is going to be certbot.eff.org/instructions. Now, the reason why I'm pointing you guys to the instructions here is because this process might change over time. It probably won't, but it's a good idea to get the instructions directly from the source. So what we do right here is we just drop this down. We choose Apache because that is the web server that we're going with. And then on system, what we're going to do is scroll all the way down here to Ubuntu 20. Now, it's actually a pet peeve of mine when people call Ubuntu 20.04 Ubuntu 20. There's two different versions of Ubuntu 20, so this is very misleading. They're talking about Ubuntu 20.04 though, so I'll click on that. And if you scroll down, you'll start to see some information right here. So it's asking us to SSH into the server. We need to make sure that snapd is installed. So do we have snapd installed? Let's check. We do not. So what we're going to do is copy this command right here. We'll paste it in. We'll clear the screen. Next, what we're going to do is install certbot itself. So we'll paste that command right here. And if for some reason the commands are different on their instructions, just go along with whatever their recommended instructions are on that site, just in case it changes later. And now we have certbot installed. So I'm just basically running all the commands that they recommend. That one was pretty easy. And we'll run this command right here to actually install the certificate. I'll paste that in. We'll press enter. So what it wants us to do right now is type an email address, which is a very good idea. If there's any issues with the certificate, for example, if it's trying to renew and it can't, it'll send you a message. Ideally, it should actually automatically renew the cert. But again, if it has any trouble, it needs to be able to reach out and let you know. So that's why I recommend that you actually type a real email address right here. So I'm going to type in mine. We'll agree. So I'll just type Y for yes. I'm going to say no. This is just asking you if you want to be on their mailing list. I don't personally want to be on their mailing list, so I'll say no by typing N. I'll press enter. It's asking me which domain I'd like to use, and it automatically detected the domain right here because I have that configuration already made. So I'll type 1 and then enter. And according to this, it looks like it's ready. Let's see. I shouldn't need this page right here. Let's go ahead and refresh. And check that out. You can see that our connection is now secure. We can see that the certificate is verified by Let's Encrypt. So we have the information right here. That's pretty cool. So now we've taken care of that. So I'm just going to click right here and we're going to check one more thing. And what we need to do is look and see what complaints Nextcloud has about our installation. And even if you followed everything perfectly up to now, you'll actually have some complaints. And I did this on purpose because I want you guys to check this for yourself just in case there's something else. So I've purposely omitted a few steps earlier that would have made this go away. So what you'll do is click up here where your name is, click on Settings. Let me just blow this up a little bit. And under Administration, click on Overview. And we have some warnings here. Now I'm going to show you how to take care of these particular errors. The thing is, though, you might have different ones on your end. All you should really have to do is just Google the error message and you should get the solution. But I'm going to take care of these right now. So back in our terminal, what we're going to do first is correct the permissions of the config file. We don't want anyone to be able to read it. And that's not actually related to any of the errors that we just saw. It's just something that would be a good idea to do. So what I'm going to do then is run sudo chmod. We're going to set the permissions to 660. I have an entire video about permissions if you want to find out how exactly that works. And what we want to do is type /var/www. And then whatever you named your installation folder, there's mine. And then underneath the config directory, we have config.php. We're setting the permission such that world doesn't have read access to the config file. We definitely don't want that. Next, what we're going to do is run sudo chown. We're going to make root the owner of that particular file. And the group, www data, will also own that file. It's going to be the same path. Var www, app directory, config.php, and there we go. Now to fix a couple of those errors, what we're going to do is run sudo nano. We're going to edit that same file, var www, app folder, config folder, config file. And I need to make the font size a little lower here. It's way too big. What we're going to do is go to the very end of the file. We'll go to the end of the last line right here. We'll make sure that we're lined up exactly. And since I'm lazy, what I'm going to do right now is paste the option that we want to add. We're going to be adding an option memcache.local. This will take care of one of the errors that we saw in the admin section. But we should also take care of another one in addition to that. So what I'll do is paste in that option as well. And what I added was the default phone region. That was another error that it was complaining about. And I set that equal to the 2-digit country code for me, which is US. Just change it to whatever yours happens to be if it's something different. Now what we'll do is save the file and then exit out. So the next thing we'll do is get rid of another one of the errors, which was referring to ImageMagick and SVG support. And all we need to do for that is install another package. And here it is. I just pasted in the package name. So press enter. Enter again. And it actually should clear quite a few of the warnings or errors that it showed in the admin section. So let's find out. Let's go back up here. And what I'll do is just click somewhere else, and then we'll go back to overview. And now we have only one warning about our setup. Let's see if we can fix this one too. So we'll go back down here to the terminal. Let's try to solve this. We'll edit the virtual host file that we configured earlier. So sudo nano etc apache 2 sites available, and then our config file. And the file name is going to be a little bit different. You should have one that has SSL in the name, similar to this. So what I'm going to do is actually scroll down just a little bit here. And what I'll do is paste in the new option, which you can get from the blog article, along with everything else. And I just pasted it in right there. And I'll make it a bit smaller so you guys can actually see what I've done. This right here is the line that I've just added. So pause the video if you need to, check the blog article if you need to. But just make sure that this line is right here. It increases the security of our site, so it's very important. I'll save the file, exit out. And then next what we'll do is restart Apache. We'll check the status, make sure that everything is good. And so far so good. Let's go back to our site. And we'll just go to another section. I probably could have refreshed it, but anyway, let's see what happens. All checks passed. So in my case, I was able to get rid of every single error that shows up here, which is definitely a good thing to do. If you have any errors here that were not solved with what we've done, then what you could do is just copy and paste the error message. I normally don't tell people to Google things, but just in case there's something I haven't seen before, you could copy the error message, then in Google type Nextcloud, paste the error message, and you should probably find exactly what you're looking for to help you clear that message. Another thing to know is that by default, we are on the stable channel. If you wanted to check out something else, you can actually change this to enterprise or beta. I'm going to leave mine on stable. Enterprise actually receives slower updates, so if you're using this for a company, for example, that might actually be a better idea. But I'm going to leave it on stable. Beta is for those of you that just like to test new features, so if you want to help the Nextcloud project out, if you find any bugs while using beta, you can report those bugs. But for everybody else, I recommend keeping it on stable. Before I close out the video, what I would like to do right now is show you guys how to set up Office integration within Nextcloud. And this will enable online document editing, which is just so cool. And it's really easy to set up as well. There's only 2 plugins that we'll have to install, and then we're good to go. So what we're going to do is go up here and click on our little user icon. We're going to go down to Apps. And there's all kinds of applications or add-ons that you can install within Nextcloud that'll give it additional capabilities. But again, what I'm going to focus on right now is setting up Office integration. The first add-on that we're going to install is called the Community Document Server. So to find it, we can simply type document here in the search box. And here it is, so I'll click on it. And then I'll click download and enable. So we'll give this a moment to download and enable, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now the Community Document Server is all set and ready to go. Now the next thing we're going to do is install OnlyOffice. So I'll search for that. And there it is right there. So I'm just going to click download and enable. And it looks like it's already done. That's pretty quick. So let's go over here to Files and test this out to make sure that it's working. And what I'll do is just click into Documents right here. I'll click the plus icon, and I'll click New Document. And I'm not going to worry about giving it a name. I just want to test that this works. So I'll click on the arrow. And check this out. We have an Office document editor right here within Nextcloud. And as you can see, it's working. We're able to edit documents right here within Nextcloud. That's awesome. So there you have it. By now, you should have your very own Nextcloud server. How cool is that? Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this particular tutorial, or if there's anything that you might want me to go over in the future. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and click that like button, because that lets YouTube know that you want to see more awesome Linux content just like this. I'll see you again very soon.